Before we start tonight's episode, I need you to do something for me. Go to your medicine cabinet and grab any bottle of Tylenol or Advil or Tums, whatever you've got. Just look at it and really take a look at it.
And we're not starting a pyramid scheme here. And she's not trying to sell you supplements or telling you have to drug yourself to get through this podcast. Please don't drug yourself.
Please don't. But look at it, because what you're going to see is there's a cardboard box that's sealed shut. And inside of that is a plastic cap you have to push down and twist. And then under that cap is a foil seal glued to the rim. Maybe a cotton ball stuffed on top for good measure.
If it doesn't have a cotton ball, I don't want it.
That's kind of true. I want the cotton ball.
Yeah.
But the point is there are 3 layers of protection between you and a headache pill. And if any one of those seals is broken when you pick it up off of the shelf, you put it back. You don't even think about it.
And if it's one of those blister packs, you just sit there and question your life's decisions.
I have watched him try to open those, and let me tell you.
I just give them to you like I'm a 3-year-old.
He does. He really, really does.
I don't do it.
But here's the thing. None of that existed before September 29th, 1982. Before that date, you could walk into any pharmacy, any grocery store in America, twist open a bottle of Tylenol, do literally whatever you wanted to the capsules inside, put the cap back on, and slide it right back onto the shelf. No seal, no shrink wrap, no tamper-evident anything, just trust.
And this ease and simplicity was just universally accepted and loved in the 80s, like cocaine.
And then 7 people in the Chicago suburbs took Tylenol for headaches and sore throats and never woke up. And that agreement, that fundamental unspoken social contract between consumers and the products they buy, shattered overnight. Those 3 layers of protection on your medicine bottle, they're not a convenience feature. They're a scar. They're fear.
Every single tamper-evident seal in America is just this tiny monument to the fact that someone, somewhere, decided to poison strangers for reasons we still don't fully understand yet.
Sneaky footsteps in the night, clues that vanish out of sight. Grab your hat and magnifying glass. We'll talk this case and have a blast. Mugshot mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know.
Welcome to Mugshot Mysteries. I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Gabriel.
And tonight's episode is called Sealed for Your Protection. We're going deep into the Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982. 7 random deaths, a 40-year investigation that produced 3 suspects and 0 convictions, and a case that fundamentally rewired how America thinks about safety, trust, and the invisible threat that might be sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now.
We'll try to have a few careful chuckles before it's over. Because
what?
Because the world is absurd and has no meaning.
Oh boy. Well, we'll circle back to that. But for now, grab your sealed, tamper-evident, triple protected beverage of choice, and let's go back to 1982 like a flock of seagulls.
To understand why the Tylenol murders broke America's brain like they did, you have to understand what America's brain looked like in 1982. And it was cracked fried eggs as far as I could see. Because the early 80s were, and I mean this in the most complicated way possible, a real vibes-based economy. And before this is over, I figure over under 4 on the cocaine-related jokes. I'm already at 1. So Let's start with the sometimes or always or never contentious, depending on how you are, Reaganomics. And it's you who get to explain it, Kathryn. Ready and go.
I always get the good ones. But all right, because I am ready for this presentation, thank you very much. You can't see it, but that poster board is up over here. So
yeah, figuratively.
Yeah, or literally, you don't know. You haven't looked inside my closet. Okay, guys. Ronald Reagan had been in office for about a year and a half. He'd won in a landslide against Jimmy Carter, and his whole pitch was optimism. Morning in America. The malaise is over. The hostages are home. We're back, baby. And he's an actor, so it's extra convincing, you know? And for a lot of people, it genuinely felt that way. The stock market was recovering. Interest rates were coming down from the stratosphere. And do you know how you can find out if someone bought their first house in the late 70s?
How?
Oh, they'll tell you as soon as you complain about a 6% interest rate. So there was this collective exhale that was happening.
But the actual reality of 1982 was kind of grim. Unemployment hit nearly 11% that year. We were technically in a recession, but the narrative, which is incredibly important, was optimism. Reagan understood something that a lot of leaders didn't. People will tolerate pain if you give them a story that says that pain is just temporary and the future is bright. And if you're good looking. And if you can act. That's called the halo effect. And that's when you deem someone attractive and you're more likely to trust them and think they're honest because of that. You know, as an aside, because Reagan had that going for him in spades.
Yeah, well, those good looks worked. And the story extended to everything. America was the good guy. The Soviets were the evil empire. Reagan literally called them that the following year. Danger was external. Threats came from out there, from Moscow, from communists, from foreign enemies. The idea that something could be rotten inside the American experience, inside the products on the shelves of your local Jewel Osco in suburban Chicago, well, that just didn't compute.
This is what psychologists call the just world hypothesis. And this is on a national scale. And what that means is good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. And if you're a middle-class family in Elk Grove Village and you're just buying a name brand medicine from a store that you should trust, nothing bad's going to happen to you, right? That's literally the deal. You made a deal with life, with this country, with the goodness of the people around you, maybe the devil, who knows? The point is good things happen to good people. Most people think that they're good people, even if they have those devil deals.
And then there's a drug culture context, which is ironic in the darkest possible way, because in 1982, it's right at the beginning of the war on drugs. Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign was gaining steam. The message was everywhere. Drugs are dangerous. Drugs will kill you. Drugs come from criminals and pushers and dark corners of society where people in dark trench coats offer your teenager drugs so hard they come with brass knuckles. The threat of these illicit substances were prevalent. There was a ton of cocaine, literally, and then there was still heroin and PCP to attend with, which are no less life-destroying.
But guess what, Kathryn? No one ever said, man, that guy was so high on Tylenol when he did A or B or ran through the streets naked, barking like a seal.
Not the #1 over-the-counter pain reliever in America, sold by Johnson & Johnson, one of the most trusted brands in the country. Good old, safe old Tylenol controlled more than 35% of the pain reliever market. Think about that. More than a third of every headache in America was being treated by this one product. It was in every household. It was as American as apple pie, if apple pie also cured your hangover and slightly elevated your liver count.
The cultural assumption was legal drugs, the ones with brand names and commercials and smiling families on the packaging, those are safe. It's the stuff in the back alleys you worry about, and that's binary. That black and white feeling, legal equals safe, illegal equals dangerous. This was a gospel, and the Tylenol murders detonated that gospel like a ton of TNT. Any song coming in mind, Kathryn?
Yeah. I'm TNT. I'm dynamite. Freaking fantastic. You know, because some would say that I'm TNT and that I'm dynamite. You know, people who know me. Just saying.
Yeah, I've never said that.
Ugh, we'll come back to that.
You're dynamite.
Thank you. But first, let's talk about what actually happened on the morning of September 29th, 1982. Because the details of this case are as cruel as it comes. It's extremely tough stuff, so beware. You may have a general idea about the Tylenol murders, but it's whom it happened to that really pushes it into the stratosphere. Mary Kellerman was 12 years old. She lived in Elk Grove Village, a suburb northwest of Chicago. On the morning of September 29th, she woke up with a sore throat and a runny nose. Standard kid stuff. Her parents, like a million parents before and after them, gave her one extra strength Tylenol capsule and sent her back to bed.
Just one capsule for sore throat. It was probably precautionary even.
But by 7 a.m., Mary was dead on the bathroom floor. Her parents thought it was some kind of freak medical event. An aneurysm maybe? A seizure? There was no reason, none, to suspect the Tylenol. I mean, why would you? That same day, less than 10 miles away in Arlington Heights, a 27-year-old postal worker named Adam Janis came home feeling just lousy. He took some extra strength Tylenol, and by mid-afternoon, he collapsed. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Initial thought was a heart attack, a massive heart attack. Now, here's where this case goes from horrible to unspeakably horrible. Adam's family gathered at his house that evening to grieve. His brother Stanley, 25, and Stanley's wife Teresa, she was only 19, they had headaches, because of course they did. They were devastated. They were crying. They had just lost Adam.
So what do? They reach for that bottle of Tylenol, the same bottle that had just killed Adam.
Stanley and Teresa Janice both took capsules from Adam's bottle. They collapsed within minutes of each other. Stanley died that day. Teresa died 2 days later. 3 members of the same family, dead from the same bottle of Tylenol that was sitting right there on the kitchen counter while everyone mourned.
The cruelty of this story is almost incomprehensible. The medicine that killed Adam became the thing his family reached for in their grief over losing it. It's like the poison had a whole second act.
And over the next 2 days, 3 more victims surfaced across the Chicago suburbs. Mary Lynn Reiner, 27, from Winfield. She had given birth to her 4th child just a week earlier. A week. She took Tylenol for post-delivery pain. Mary McFarland, 31, from Lombard, took Tylenol at work at a phone center. And Paula Prince, 35, a United Airlines flight attendant, was found dead in her Chicago apartment. A receipt showed she had just purchased the Tylenol at Walgreens. 7 people, 3 days, all strangers, all in the Chicago metro area. The youngest was 12. The common thread wasn't a workplace or a neighborhood or a social circle. It was a brand name on a bottle.
Here's the thing. Serial killers usually have a type. They have a demographic. There's a geography to it, a pattern. This has nothing of those things. The only thing the victim shared was a headache and a trip to the store. The randomness was the point, and that's what made it uniquely terrifying.
Now, let's pause here for a second and just zoom out, because what happens next, which the investigation, the panic, the permanent reshaping of American consumer culture, only makes sense if you really understand the temperature of 1982.
So, like the kids say, what's the vibe check, Kathryn?
Well, the vibe check is paranoia dressed up in a silk shirt and Argyle socks.
Oh, I love Argyle socks.
Right. On the surface, everything is aspirational. Dallas and Dynasty are the biggest shows on television. E.T. is about to become the highest grossing movie of all time. Michael Jackson is months away from releasing Thriller and still has most of his nose, which is exciting. And the culture is loud, bright, confident.
But what's underneath? The Cold War is very much still cold. And by 1982, the nuclear anxiety is actually ramping up, not down. Reagan's military buildup is in full swing. The doomsday clock is at 4 minutes to midnight. It's actually 85 seconds today, which is a whole nother scary conversation. But there is genuine widespread fear that nuclear war could happen at any time. There's a TV movie called The Day After. That was about to traumatize an entire generation of Americans in 1983, which is a great year.
So you say. So you have this dual reality, and the official story is morning in America. Optimism, strength, prosperity just around the corner. But the undercurrent is existential dread. And the threats in cultural imagination are big and external. Soviet missiles, communist infiltration, drug cartels.
There is a psychological term for this, and it's called threat displacement. This is when a society is anxious about something massive and uncontrollable, like nuclear death, and it often moves that anxiety towards more tangible, manageable threats. That's why the war on drugs works so well politically. It gave people a villain they could see. A drug dealer in the corner is a threat you can easily conjure up, and see. An ICBM with a nuclear warhead traveling at 15,000 miles per hour, that's generally not as user-friendly of an image.
And the Tylenol murders blew up all of that because suddenly the threat wasn't external. It wasn't Soviet. It wasn't in a dark alley. It was in your medicine cabinet. It was domestic in every sense of the word. It was the most intimate, most trusted part of daily life. Taking medicine when you feel sick turned into a death sentence, and nobody knew who did it or why.
That's when you get what sociologists call a moral panic. And this is a sudden, intense feeling that the social order is breaking down. It's The Walking Dead. Start grabbing that canned food. Gun enthusiasts, rejoice. It's finally your time. And moral panics don't follow logic. They metastasize. One poison bottle of Tylenol becomes every bottle of everything. Being a suspect, like you came home smelling like Red Door. And in 1982, nothing was tamper-proof. Nothing. You want to know how wild the pre-Tylenol world was? You could walk into the store. You could open a jar of peanut butter. You could stick your finger in it. You could taste it.
Ew.
You put it back.
No.
People did that regularly.
Why?
Nothing was safe. Not even your PB&J.
I mean, people still do that at Costco, but they just use the little sample spoons now.
Which is given a lot of credit. I don't see a lot of spoons being used.
Let's not think about that. Moving on. There's another layer here that I think is really important for understanding 1982 specifically. This was the beginning of what historians call the greed is good era. Not just economically, but culturally. The country was pivoting hard from the communal idealism of the 60s and 70s, peace, love, Woodstock, we're all in this together, towards individualism, personal achievement, getting yours. The yuppie was being born. Wall Street was becoming glamorous. The message was, take care of yourself first, queen.
And what does one poison bottle Tylenol say to that philosophy? It says, you can do literally everything right. You can work hard. You can live in a nice suburb. You can shop at a clean store. You can buy a trusted brand, the most trusted brand. You can follow these rules. But guess what? It doesn't matter because the system you trusted was always vulnerable to just one person who decided not to play along. The Tylenol murders were, in a sense, you ready for a big statement?
I'm ready.
The dark underbelly of individualism.
Okay.
One individual acting alone could ruin the good time for everyone.
And that's before we even get into the AIDS crisis, which was just beginning to enter public consciousness in 1982. The first cases had been identified the previous year, and while the government response was catastrophically slow, that's a whole other episode, and we've touched on it before. The cultural effect was similar. Another invisible threat, another thing that could kill you that you couldn't see coming. AIDS, nuclear war, poison medicine. 1982 was the year America started learning that the things that kill you don't always announce themselves.
The philosopher Zygmunt Bauman wrote about what he called liquid fear. This is free-floating anxiety that doesn't just attach to any specific threat. It just covers everything like this anxiety craving. The early 1980s were the beginning of liquid fear as an American lifestyle. We just didn't have a name for it yet.
Within 48 hours of the first deaths, a public health nurse in Arlington Heights named Helen Jensen made the connection. She was investigating the Janus family deaths and noticed 6 pills were missing from their Tylenol bottle. She turned it over to an investigator who smelled the bottle and caught the telltale bitter almond scent of cyanide. Testing confirmed it. The capsules had been opened, the acetaminophen powder dumped out and replaced with potassium cyanide at concentrations nearly 3 times the lethal dose. This wasn't subtle. Whoever did this wanted people dead real fast.
And the method tells you something very important about the killer. Opening capsules, replacing that powder, then reassembling them, then putting them back in a bottle, then repackaging it, and then returning it to a store shelf. That is not impulsive. That's time consuming. That is very methodical. That requires a lot of patience. It requires planning and a complete detachment from the human consequences of what you're doing.
Now, Johnson & Johnson moved fast, to their credit. They pulled 31 million bottles of Tylenol off shelves nationwide. Mayor Jane Byrne banned Tylenol sales in Chicago. Police cruisers drove through suburban neighborhoods with loudspeakers telling people to throw out their Tylenol. Hospitals cleared their inventories. Pharmacists pulled products off shelves with their bare hands. People were literally flushing pills down toilets. And then, in a detail that captures paranoia perfectly, entire towns in the Chicago suburbs canceled Halloween. Trick-or-treating was called off because if someone could poison Tylenol, what was stopping them from poisoning candy?
And this is the birth of the poisoned Halloween candy myth that persisted for literally decades and up until today.
Absolutely, until today.
Yes, because guess what? It had never actually been documented before the Tylenol murders, but the psychological leap was so intuitive. If a stranger can poison your medicine, surely they can poison your candy. And that turned into gospel overnight. Parents were literally x-raying candy bags. Towns organized safe trick-or-treat events at malls and churches. It's still floating around parenting forums to this day, 40 plus years later. Parents on Facebook are still warning each other about razor blades and flat earthers. All of it traces back to September 1982. I know I've heard all of these same stories. I used to look at the person handing out the candy like me at 6, just like, this person looks shady, in my best 6-year-old way possible.
There's also the cyanide detail that I think is worth sitting with for a moment. Potassium cyanide isn't exactly something you pick up at the hardware store. In 1982, it was used in certain industrial processes: metallurgy, photography, mining. Getting your hands on it required either professional access to these industries or the knowledge and resources to produce it. But this wasn't rat poison. This wasn't bleach. This was a deliberate, specific choice of a lethal agent, and it suggests a level of sophistication that narrowed the suspect pool in theory, but widened it in practice, because the investigators couldn't figure out where the cyanide came from.
Which is the other reason the case was so frustrating for law enforcement. The weapon was exotic enough to be traceable, in theory. But in 1982, there is not a centralized database of who purchased what chemicals. There's no digital receipts, there's no security camera footage at every register. The infrastructure for investigating this kind of crime didn't exist yet. The Tylenol killer exploited this gap in the system that nobody actually knew was there.
Now, the investigation itself was, and I'm being generous here, a mess. A spectacular, multi-agency, turf war-fueled mess. Here's the backdrop. Just months before the Tylenol murders, 10 Chicago police officers, the infamous Marquette 10, had been convicted in federal court for taking bribes to protect heroin operations on the West Side. The relationship between CPD and the FBI was at an all-time low. These agencies did not trust each other.
Which is fantastic timing when you need them both to cooperate on the most high-profile poison investigation in all of American history.
So they formed a joint task force, and it lasted about 5 minutes before Chicago PD essentially broke off and started their own parallel investigation. The FBI-led task force focused on one suspect. CPD focused on a different one. 2 investigations, 2 suspects, running down 2 completely different roads. Investigators amassed over 15,000 pages of documents, tested millions of capsules, and interviewed 400 persons of interest from a pool of 20,000.
And at the end of it all, 0 arrests, 0 convictions, 0, and I mean 0 answers.
But they did identify 3 main suspects. And that's where things get really interesting, because each suspect tells you something different about the case, about the era, and about the nature of evil. Now we're going to go through all 3, starting with the most unlikely, and then building to the one that kept investigators up at night for 40 years. Now, theory 1, the Unabomber. Yes, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And before you roll your eyes, the connection isn't as crazy as it sounds.
I mean, it's a little crazy, but this guy was a lot of crazy.
It's a little crazy, but hear me out. Here's why the FBI took it seriously enough to request his DNA in 2011. Kaczynski's first 4 bombings between 1978 and 1980 all occurred in the Chicago area and its suburbs. His parents owned a home in Lombard, Illinois, the same town where victim Mary McFarland lived. He was known to stay at that home occasionally in 1982, and his entire MO was anonymous attacks on strangers through everyday objects, packages, mail, things you'd pick up without thinking twice.
So the psychological profile overlap is there if you kind of squint. Both the Unabomber and the Tylenol killer, they weaponize trust in very ordinary objects. A package in your mailbox, a bottle on a shelf. The mechanism of terror is the same, making the mundane extremely deadly.
Now, Kaczynski denied it. He said he had never possessed potassium cyanide. The FBI had his DNA on file from his 1996 arrest, but wanted a fresh sample given advances in forensic technology, which makes sense. But he refused to volunteer one, though he later agreed under conditions. But in the end, nothing came of it.
And you know what? Honestly, the biggest argument against Kaczynski is motive. The Unabomber was ideological. He had a manifesto. Trust us, he wanted credit, at least eventually. He wanted his ideas heard. The Tylenol killer wanted apparently nothing. There was no manifesto, there's no ideology, there's no credit. And that is a fundamentally different psychological profile.
Now, let's talk about anonymous evil. because the Tylenol killer is almost unique in the history of American crime. Think about it. Virtually every mass killer, every terrorist, every serial murderer either wants recognition, wants to send a message, or has a specific target. The Tylenol killer had none of that. No target, no message, no claim of credit.
Which is really eerie because a killer with a motive is, on some level, understandable. You can disagree with their reasoning, you can call it insane, but at least you can follow some sort of logic from point A to point B, or at least understand the logic as they see it. Even if it's all straight crazy town to you, a killer with no apparent motive, someone who poisons strangers and then just goes home and calls it a day, that represents something closer to pure chaos. And humans are terrible at processing chaos. We've talked about this. We need stories. We need reasons. The Tylenol case gives us nothing. It's absolutely absurd.
Which is probably why the conspiracy theories got so creative. The Kaczynski theory gained traction partly because his initials are TK, Tylenol killer. I wish I were joking. I'm not. And then also because he had an obsession with wood, and some of the street names and victim names had wood-related connections. It was pattern seeking by desperate people trying to make sense of something that was just absolutely senseless.
And who knew we were going to talk about wood so much in this podcast?
I just knew it. Let me drop my wow. Take your shot, guys.
Now, you want to know what that is, by the way?
What?
Trying to find meaning in something that's so ridiculous, like woodology.
Please, tell me.
That's apophenia. That's a tendency to perceive meaningful connections between totally unrelated things. It's the brain's coping mechanism when it's confronted with pure randomness.
Okay.
We rather believe in a vast, complex conspiracy than accept that sometimes terrible things just happen for no reason at all. We say it all the time. Humans really, really want connections, and the world provides way too many variables. There's too much information for our still caveman brains to process.
All right, let's jump forward for a second to right now, to today. Go to a grocery store, walk down any aisle. Everything is sealed, shrink wrapped, vacuum packed, tamper-evident bandit. The milk has a pull tab, the orange juice has a foil seal, the peanut butter has an inner lid. Your protein bars are individually wrapped inside a box that's also wrapped. Your toothpaste has a sealed cap. We don't even register it anymore. It's just how things are. But every single one of those seals is a direct descendant of what happened in Chicago in 1982.
And here's something that's interesting to me. We don't think of those seals as any evidence of danger. Do you?
No.
We think of them as an evidence of safety.
Yeah,
we trust the seal.
Keep the germs out.
Yeah, well, to keep the cyanide out. But that seal only exists because trust was broken. And this is kind of a paradox. We rebuilt trust by institutionalizing distrust. Every tamper-evident package is like saying, we assume someone might try to kill you, and here's proof they haven't yet. And if that all sounds incredibly confusing, not gonna lie, I just confused myself a little bit saying it all.
Well, within weeks of the murders, Johnson & Johnson introduced triple seal packaging for Tylenol, a glued box, a sealed cap, and a foil inner seal. In 1983, Congress passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, making product tampering a federal crime punishable by up to life in prison. In 1989, the FDA established mandatory tamper-resistant packaging guidelines for all over-the-counter medications. The pharmaceutical industry abandoned powder-fill capsules entirely because they were too easy to open and contaminate, and replaced them with a solid caplet, which was a tablet shaped like a capsule, specifically designed to be tamper-resistant.
So what do we have here? We have one person, this one unknown Chicagoan, fundamentally redesigning the entire American consumer product industry. Every medicine bottle, every food package, every sealed container you've ever opened in your life has been shaped by this crime. That's almost an unprecedented level of societal impact from one single criminal act. Think about this. There couldn't be less effort put forth that had this many wide-ranging changes. It hit a nerve that we didn't even know existed.
And Johnson & Johnson's response became the gold standard for corporate crisis management. It's literally a Harvard Business School case study. They didn't hide, they didn't minimize, they didn't lawyer up first. They pulled 31 million bottles at a cost of over $100 million, close to $300 million in today's money. They put consumer safety ahead of profit, publicly and unambiguously. And it worked. Tylenol's market share had plummeted from 35% to under 8% after the murders. Within a year of the relaunch with new packaging, they'd recovered almost all of it.
Which is a paradox and its own kind of dark commentary. The system worked, the corporate response was genuine and actually effective, but the system only worked after 7 people died. The question nobody could answer was, why wasn't this system designed to prevent this in the first place?
Because it didn't occur to anyone that it needed to be. That's the social contract again. Before October 1982, the assumption was that people wouldn't tamper with products. Not because they couldn't, they obviously could, but because why would they? It was unthinkable. And then someone thought it. Now, let's move to theory 2, Roger Arnold, the 8th victim. All right, let's get back to the suspects. If the Kaczynski theory is the conspiracy board with the red string, Roger Arnold is the tragedy within the tragedy. On the same day that Johnson & Johnson received the extortion letter, and we'll get to that, Chicago police got a phone call from a bar owner on Lincoln Avenue named Marty Sinclair. Sinclair told them that one of his regulars, a guy named Roger Arnold, had been acting erratic and talking about killing people with a white powder.
Which is always a good bar conversation.
Totally.
Could have just been talking about the cubbies, man.
I mean,
Arnold worked as a dock worker at Jewel Osco Warehouse. Jewel Osco being a major grocery chain where some of the tainted Tylenol was purchased. He had connections to the case that were circumstantial, but let's be honest, they're hard to ignore. He worked with victim Mary Reiner's father at the warehouse, and his estranged wife had been treated at a hospital directly across the street from the store where Reiner bought her poisoned Tylenol. When police searched his house, they found a copy of The Poor Man's James Bond. This is a survivalist manual that contained instructions on producing potassium cyanide. There's so much smoke here that it's kind of hotboxing.
Yeah.
For those unfamiliar, and I'm sure you are,
I am.
The Poor Man's James Bond was basically the 1980s equivalent to the dark side of Reddit. This is a pile of dangerous information marketed to paranoid survivalists and aspiring anarchists. This is the kind of thing you would mail order from the back pages of a magazine because, truly, 1982 was a wild, wild west.
Now, Arnold was held in question multiple times, but he was never charged. There just wasn't enough evidence. Roger Arnold's story becomes its own cautionary tale about what happens when suspicion becomes identity. The media got his name. His coworkers at the warehouse started calling him the Tylenol kid. The scrutiny just absolutely destroyed him. His marriage was already dissolving, and the public suspicion pushed him over the edge. Arnold became convinced that Marty Sinclair, the bar owner who tipped off police, had ruined his life. In the summer of 1983, Arnold drove to Lincoln Avenue with a gun. He saw a man leaving a bar near Sinclair's establishment, and he was certain it was Sinclair. So, he shot the man dead. It wasn't Sinclair.
It was John Sinisha, a 46-year-old computer consultant. He's a father of 3. He is completely innocent. There is zero connection to the Tylenol case. There's zero connection to Roger Arnold. There's zero connection to anything. He was just leaving the bar with friends.
John Stanisha has been called the 8th Tylenol victim, not because he was poisoned, but because the Tylenol murder set off a chain of events. Suspicion, obsession, paranoia, rage, that ended with a bullet in the wrong man's chest. Arnold was convicted of Stanisha's murder, naturally, and sentenced to 30 years. He served about 15 because he died in 2008.
And this is a part that's important for understanding how crime doesn't just produce victims, it actually produces ripples. The Tylenol killer took 7 lives directly, but Roger Arnold's destruction, John Stanisha's death, the trauma to both families, that's collateral damage. That's a blast radius for an unsolved crime that expands outward and just doesn't stop. This is the radiation that is slowly leaking into the populace.
In 2010, Arnold's body was actually exhumed from a military cemetery near Joliet so the FBI could collect DNA. They removed his femur, tested it, put him back in the ground the same day, and then his DNA didn't match the samples found on the tainted bottles, and neither did Lewis's, for the record.
When I go, don't have somebody remove my femur and then put me back in the ground the same day.
Absolutely not.
Just saying, it doesn't sound fun.
Don't worry.
So, all to say that right now, at this very moment, the killer's DNA might be sitting in an evidence locker room, and it might belong to someone that is on absolutely nobody's radar.
belonging to someone who was and whose sample just degraded too much over the decades. And that's the frustration of this case, because the evidence exists, the technology is advancing, but time is running out. And the prime suspect, it already ran out. Now, before we get to suspect number 3, we need to talk about what the Tylenol murders unleashed, because the case didn't just scare America, it gave America ideas.
Which is the darkest possible sentence.
Correct.
In the weeks and months following the Tylenol murders, copycat tampering incidents exploded across the country. Additional contaminated Tylenol bottles were found in Chicago area stores. They hadn't been sold yet, thankfully, but then reports started coming in from everywhere. Strychnine and Excedrin, rat poison and mouthwash, needles and candy bars. Now, most of it was hoaxes or hysteria, but some of this was deadly real. The most significant copycat case was Stella Nichol in Washington State. In 1986, Nichol laced Excedrin capsules with cyanide, killing her husband and, well, a random stranger. Guess what she did it for?
Oh, it's always money.
The insurance money.
Of course it was.
Remember we talked about women and serial killers? Yeah, y'all kill for money. Anyhow, she was caught partly because her library records showed she checked out books on poisoning, and she was convicted under the brand new Federal Anti-Tampering Act that only existed because of the Tylenol murders. Library, the original Google search for dumb criminals.
I mean, that's what I was just thinking. I'm like, oh, it's no longer looking at their Google history set. It was like, what did their library cards say? Anyway, so the legislative response to the Tylenol case literally became the tool used to prosecute the next generation of poisoners. And there's a grim efficiency to that. The copycat phenomenon is actually one of the most studied aspects of this case in criminology circles. It illustrates what researchers call behavioral contagion. The idea that high-profile crimes don't just inspire fear, they inspire imitation. The Tylenol killer, whoever they were, didn't just commit 7 murders. They invented a method of terrorism that dozens of people subsequently attempted to replicate.
And the kicker, Kathryn, the copycats mostly did want something. Money, revenge, attention. Stella Nichol wanted that damn insurance payoff. Other tamperers wanted to extort companies. They took the Tylenol killer's method, but stripped away the one thing that made the original case so psychologically unusual. The apparent absence of a motive. The copycats couldn't even imitate the meaningless.
All right, you ready for the big one?
I'm ready.
The suspect that consumed 40 years of investigative resources that multiple FBI agents dedicated their careers to, and whose death in 2023 effectively closed the book on this case without a single murder charge ever being filed. James William Lewis, also known as Robert Richardson, also known as about 20 other aliases, a man described by investigators as a chameleon and by his own neighbor as a textbook psychopath.
Let us just say upfront, Lewis was never convicted of the Tylenol murders. He was never even charged. Everything we're about to discuss, I guess, is circumstantial. He maintained his innocence until the day he died, like they do. But the circumstantial evidence is a lot. If Arnold was hotboxing, the smoke coming off this guy was making Smokey the Bear pick up smoking.
All right, guys, let's start at the beginning. And I mean the very beginning. Because Lewis's backstory reads like a checklist from a serial killer origin story.
And you're going to wonder how he did not end up in jail.
He was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1946. His father abandoned the family. His mother left him and his 2 sisters at a motel, and they were recovered by social workers and entered the foster system, which is horrible. He was eventually adopted by Charlotte and Floyd Lewis, a church-going farming couple in Carl Junction, Missouri. And by all accounts, the adoptive parents were decent people.
And by all accounts, that didn't help.
In 1966, when he was 20, Lewis attacked his adoptive mother with an axe.
I would like to emphasize that this is the starting point of his criminal history. This is just a prologue, axe attack. Some people might start with something small, like toilet papering their principal's house, but he decided to really go for it. What an overachiever.
Then, in 1978 in Kansas City, Lewis was working as a tax accountant. One of his clients was a 72-year-old retiree named Raymond West, a friendly, well-known guy in his neighborhood. Well, West disappeared, and when police found him, his body had been dismembered and hoisted into his own attic using a triple pulley game hoist, the kind deer hunters use to string up a kill.
which is incredibly specific piece of equipment to have handy in a Saw movie.
Correct. Now, Lewis was charged with the murder after he tried to cash a $5,000 forged check from West's bank account. Police also found boxes of his canceled checks in Lewis's car, along with cords and ropes with knots matching those used in the attic. I mean, it was looking like a slam dunk case. And then it fell apart. The police who first interrogated Lewis had failed to read him his Miranda rights. Key evidence was thrown out. The charges were dismissed. Not reading Miranda rights, that's really a thing, not just on Law and Order, you guys.
Miranda, protecting the innocent and occasionally the extremely guilty deer hunting hoist killer psychopath since 1966.
Now, Lewis then embarked on a credit card fraud scheme, makes sense, and got convicted of 6 counts of mail fraud and skipped town before sentencing. He and his wife, Leanne, resurfaced in Chicago under the names Robert and Nancy Richardson, and they lived there briefly through 1982. And then, in October 1982, just days after 7 people died from cyanide-laced Tylenol, a letter arrived at Johnson & Johnson's headquarters. It claimed responsibility for the killings, and it demanded $1 million to stop the killing. And it was written by James William Lewis.
And let's talk about what made this letter so significant, well beyond the obvious. The letter contained details about how the poisonings could have been carried out that had not been released to the public. Lewis described a method: buying Tylenol, adding cyanide, returning the bottles to shelves. The investigators hadn't publicly even confirmed that. He had also been working on the letter for 3 days. Now, this is according to his own admission, and investigators later determined that the letter was postmarked October 1st, and this is just 2 days after the first deaths, before many more details were widely reported. His fingerprints were also found on pages related to cyanide in a poisoning reference book he owned. Look, just putting it out there because it's not looking good for this man.
Now, Lewis was the subject of a nationwide manhunt for 2 months. He evaded capture until December 13th, 1982, when a librarian at the New York Public Library recognized him from news coverage and tipped off the FBI, and they arrested him on the spot.
Caught by a librarian. And guess what, Kathryn? There's like a certain amount of poetry to that.
I would agree. Now, see, none of you knew you were coming to this podcast for library jokes, but yet here we are. So at trial, Lewis admitted he wrote the letter. His defense was that he was trying to embarrass his wife's former employer by directing the $1 million to be deposited in their bank account. It was supposedly a weird, convoluted act of revenge against the travel agency, not an actual extortion attempt. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years. He served about 12 or 13, including pre-trial time. But here's the thing. He was only convicted of extortion, not murder, not tampering, not anything related to the actual poisonings. Prosecutors said they couldn't place him in Chicago at the time of the murders, couldn't find physical evidence directly linking him to the tainted bottles, and didn't want to risk an acquittal on a circumstantial case.
So, do tell us what happened.
Well, let me lay it out. Because beyond the letter and the fingerprints on the cyanide book, Lewis had previously been charged with a dismemberment murder.
You didn't think you were going to say that today, did you?
No, not really. He'd attacked his mother with an axe. He had a documented history of using aliases and evading law enforcement across multiple states. He was living in Chicago under a false name in the period before the murders. After his release from prison in 1995, his neighbor in Cambridge, Massachusetts, said Lewis once described waving at security cameras in New York at the time of the murders, essentially manufacturing an alibi.
Now, that last one is the one that kind of gets us. Waving at cameras? Who does that? Who makes a point of being seen on surveillance cameras unless they need to establish they were somewhere else? His neighbor's reaction was exactly right. You were premeditating an alibi. Nobody's looking for you.
In 2004, Lewis was arrested again, kidnapping and sexual assault charges in Cambridge. He spent 3 years in jail awaiting trial before the charges were dropped because the victim was too traumatized to testify. In 2006, the FBI and Arlington Heights PD created what they internally called the Tylenol Task Force 2, a second major push to crack the case using modern forensic technology. In 2009, the FBI raided Lewis's Cambridge home and seized computers and documents. They collected his DNA, and it didn't match the samples on the bottles. But investigators noted that DNA degradation over nearly 3 decades could account for that. The FBI even ran an elaborate sting operation. Undercover agents befriended Lewis and traveled with him to both New York and Chicago, trying to get him to slip up, to say something incriminating. I mean, he talked plenty. Lewis was always willing to talk, but he never confessed.
Now, let's talk about Lewis in his later years. He ran a tax preparation business with his wife in Cambridge and just lived a normal life. He made dinner, he filed taxes, and he also created a website proclaiming his innocence. And he posted documents and theories about who the real Tylenol killer was.
Oh, of course.
Yes, this was very much OJ and If I Did It. He called himself a victim of government overreach. He volunteered his opinions to investigators. He enjoyed being at the center of this. He relished the intellectual game of it.
Now, one of the investigators on the case told the Chicago Tribune that Lewis once called a reporter furious about coverage that presumed his guilt, even as he was simultaneously inserting himself into the investigation. He wanted control of the narrative. He wanted to be the smartest person in the room, like always.
So we all like this man, right?
Totally.
Sounds like a likable person. Now, that tracks perfectly with a certain personality profile. And this is a need for intellectual dominance. This is a thrill of evading capture. This is the inability to stop engaging with a case even when the silence would serve you better. These are all consistent with psychopathic narcissism. He couldn't let go of the game. In the case, it was the biggest game of his life.
Then, in July 2023, Leanne Lewis found her husband unresponsive in their Cambridge home. He was declared dead at 76, heart and liver disease. His death was ruled not suspicious. It came just before the release of a Netflix docuseries, Cold Case: The Tylenol Murders, in which Lewis appeared in previously recorded interviews. In those interviews, featured in the 2025 series, he contradicted several of his earlier claims, including his supposed resentment towards Johnson & Johnson, saying he actually wasn't angry at the company at all. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney Jeremy Margulis' reaction: "I was saddened to learn of James Lewis's death, not because he's dead, but because he didn't die in prison."
Amen. And retired FBI Special Agent Roy Lane said Lewis's death ends a lifetime of cruelty to others and a compulsive need for revenge.
The case remains officially open with the Arlington Heights Police Department, but every investigator connected to it has said, off the record, that the case effectively died with Lewis. For 40 years, every road led to him, and for 40 years, the evidence was never quite enough.
And like we like to do sometimes, let's talk about what this case represents philosophically. Now, not just as a crime, but as a kind of existential problem. You know I love existential anything. The Tylenol murders are one of the purest examples of what modern researchers call stochastic terrorism. And this is random acts of violence that are effectively impossible to predict, prevent, or even fully understand. The term wasn't in the vocabulary in 1982, but the concept was born there.
And the thing that makes the Tylenol case distinct from other acts of random violence is the anonymity. This person, assuming it was one person, committed what was functionally an act of domestic terrorism, killed 7 strangers, reshaped an entire industry, changed federal law, and then, poof, disappeared. No manifesto, no video, no claim of responsibility. If Lewis did it, he never admitted it. And if someone else did it, well, they've never surfaced at all.
And that challenges something fundamental about how we process evil in general. We have frameworks for understanding killers who want fame, school shooters, serial killers who taunt police. We have frameworks for ideological violence, terrorism with a cause, however twisted they may be. We even have frameworks for rage-based killers, domestic violence, workplace shootings. But a killer who wants nothing? Who poisons strangers and then just continues living? That's genuinely difficult for the human mind to even metabolize.
There's a concept in philosophy called the banality of evil. Hannah Arendt coined it while covering the trial of Nazi Adolf Eichmann. The idea is that the most horrifying evil doesn't come from monsters. It comes from ordinary people performing terrible acts as if they were just routine tasks. The Tylenol killer may be the American domestic version of that concept. Not an ideologue, not a raving madman, just someone who opened up some pill capsules, poured in some powder, sealed them back up, and then drove to a few stores and placed them on shelves. mundane actions with monstrous consequences.
And the social contract angle is the piece that ties everything together. Before the Tylenol murders, American society operated on an implicit agreement. The things available to you in public spaces, the products on the shelves, the infrastructure you depend on, the systems that deliver your food and your medicine, they're safe. Not because anyone guarantees it, but because we collectively agreed to participate in good faith. How does somebody break that rule? The Tylenol killer didn't just break that agreement, they revealed that it had always been an illusion. The safety was never guaranteed. It was just assumed. And once you see that, you can't unsee it.
And we didn't unsee it. We responded by building physical barriers, seals, packaging, anti-tampering laws to replace the social trust that was lost. We engineered our way around a philosophical problem. We couldn't make people trustworthy, so we made the bottles harder to open.
Which, if you think about it, is the very most American solution possible. Don't fix the underlying social issue. Just add more plastic and maybe give it a lift kit.
And the ripple effects extend way beyond medicine bottles. Think about the world we live in now. Security cameras are everywhere. TSA checkpoints, metal detectors at schools, locked cockpit doors, bollards outside of shopping malls, surveillance software on your work computer. Every one of these is a physical manifestation of lost trust. Everyone says we cannot assume good faith, so we will build a barrier instead.
The sociologist Ulrich Beck coined the term risk society in 1986, just 4 years after the Tylenol murders. And this describes a world where the primary organizing principle isn't the distribution of goods, but the distribution of risks. Who's at risk? From what? How do we manage it? Tylenol murders are one of the foundational events of a risk society. They prove that modern consumer life itself could, and from that point forward, risk management becomes central to literally everything. How we package products, how we design public spaces, how we legislate, how we live, and on and on and on it goes. Where it stops, well, no one really knows.
I mean, you could draw a line. It's not a straight line. It's messy and tangled. But you could draw a line from the Tylenol murders through the Oklahoma City bombing, through 9/11, through mass shootings, through every moment where Americans have been forced to reckon with the idea that safety is not guaranteed and that the threat might come from inside the house. The Tylenol killer didn't start that conversation, but they might have been the first one to make it unavoidable. Now, there's one more thing I want to leave you with, a detail from the investigation that doesn't get enough attention. In early 1983, the FBI tried something desperate. They asked Chicago Tribune columnist Bob Greene to publish the home address and grave location of Mary Kellerman, the 12-year-old girl who was the first victim. The Kellerman family consented. The theory proposed by FBI criminal profiler John Douglas was that the killer might visit the house or the gravesite if they knew where they were. I mean, some killers do that. They revisit the sites of their crimes. They need to see the aftermath. Both locations were placed under 24-hour surveillance for months, but the killer never came.
And honestly, that might be the most telling piece of evidence in this entire case. There's not evidence of who did it, but evidence of what kind of person did it. A killer who doesn't revisit. This is a killer who doesn't check in, doesn't need to see what they did. And that's not compulsion or obsession, that's complete indifference. And indifference might be the most frightening motive of all.
There's a surveillance photo from this case. It's from the Walgreens where Paula Prince, the flight attendant, the last victim, purchased her Tylenol. The security camera captured her at the checkout. And just a few feet behind her, there's a bearded man near the shelf where the Tylenol was displayed. Police have suggested that man could be the killer. Could be nobody. I mean, we don't know. But the photo exists. A grainy, low-resolution image of a woman buying the thing that would kill her. And maybe, the person who put it there standing right behind her, close enough to touch.
That image is a case in miniature. Proximity without identification. Evidence without conclusion. A face without a name.
Retired nurse Helen Jensen, the public health official who first identified the poison bottle at the Janus house, who cracked the case wide open, was 86 years old when Lewis died in 2023. She told the Associated Press, "His death is a conclusion. Not necessarily the conclusion everyone wanted, but it is an end. I'm 86 now, and I'm glad I got to see the end before I die."
That's 41 years. 41 years of carrying a case with no ending. The Tylenol victim's family spent 4 decades waiting for an answer that never came. Think about what that does to a person. Think about the Janis family. 4-year-old Kasia Novak Janis watched her father collapse in their home. She grew up, she got older, and the person who killed her dad was never named.
The Chicago Tylenol murders remain officially unsolved. No one has been charged. The primary suspect is dead. The evidence sits in storage. And every single day, hundreds of millions of Americans twist open bottles with tamper-evident seals. Seals that exist because, one week in September 1982, someone decided that the most ordinary act in the world, taking medicine for a headache, should be lethal, and then just walked away.
So, next time you fight with one of those seals or one of those blister packs, maybe take a second, not to be afraid, but to remember Mary Kellerman, Adam, Stanley, and Teresa Janis, Mary Reiner, Mary McFarland, Paula Prince. They didn't die for nothing. The inconvenience in your hands is the proof.
Sealed for your protection. For real this time.
And here's a question we'll leave you with, and it's not a comfortable one. We live in a world where threats are even more invisible than a poison pill. Cyber attacks, deepfakes, disinformation, supply chain vulnerabilities. The Tylenol killer exploited a physical gap in the system. And what gaps exist now that we haven't thought to seal? What's the next social contract waiting to be broken? Because there will be one.
Sleep well, everybody. That's our show. I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Gabriel.
And this has been Mugshot Mysteries. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mugshot Mysteries Podcast. And don't forget to follow our show. Also, leave us a review. It actually makes a difference. But before we go, as always, what did we learn today, Gabriel?
We have learned that there is not razors and Snickers. Sorry, Mom Tails. We're safe on that account. Though, it did give parents everywhere a very great excuse to eat their kids' candies. For safety. We have learned that society offers certain non-negotiables that evil sometimes wishes to negotiate. We have learned that as people, we are reactive because deep down we do believe in the inherent goodness of man. Or we just don't want to think of the alternative until our hands are forced. And finally, we have learned that the scariest ideal isn't evil itself. It's committing evil acts with complete indifference to the act itself.
Sneaky footsteps in the night, clues that vanish out of sight. Grab your hat and magnifying glass. We'll talk this case and have a blast. Mugshot mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know. Gem, a secret note, a shady figure in a trench coat. The clock is ticking, the plot gets thick. We'll crack this puzzle quick as a click. Mugshot mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know. Breadcrumbs through the haze. Every clue's a piece in the